Hi guys, this lecture is going to be quick, ideally. It's going to focus on process analysis, which is of course the subject matter for Unit 2. Everything I'm taking here comes straight out of your Chapter 6, Chapter 6, from your process analysis chapter. That's Chapter 6 from A Student's Guide to Writing. I have also linked in the FYI section for this week the slides that you'll see in this lecture. I'm not certain you really need to go back to the slides because they're very general, and really if you're looking for the details, either rewatch the video or check out Chapter 6 from A Student's Guide to Writing, mostly because the slide you see here is the last slide, first and last. So I'm going to talk about the two types of process analysis. I will go through the directive process analysis first, and then I will go through the explanatory or informative so that I can just move myself to either side of the screen. I think, if we're talking about process analysis and we're recognizing that process analysis can be found in a number of ways, and one of those ways is through sets of instructions, and that's really what an instruction is. It's an analysis of a process broken down into steps so that that process can be replicated. Well, that is a directive. So instructions are the best example of directive process analysis. They are step-based. First do this, then do this, do this third thing, and finally do this last thing. They're how-to often, how to bake a cake, how to sew a button, how to study for a test, how to make friends. All of these things are processes that you can follow so that you can do what the author is helping you learn how to do. There are two types of directive process analysis. There's a loose process analysis, which means you can kind of loosely follow these steps. You don't have to necessarily go in exactly this order, and also there may be additional steps that work for some people that might not work for you. In our list of examples here, you'll see how to study for a test and how to make friends. These are loose types of directive process analyses because there are lots of ways you can make friends. If I'm writing a set of instructions on how to make friends, that might work for some audiences, but maybe not for other audiences. If I could be writing to a group of extroverted people, and my how to make friends loose process analysis is going to be different for if I was, say, writing to an introverted set of my audience. How to make friends would sound different. It would look different. Some of the steps might be different. A fixed process analysis is the steps can't change. The steps can't change in content, and the steps can't change in order. So if I'm saying how to bake a cake, I can't put the ingredients in the oven before I mix them up together. I can't pour my ingredients into my pan before I grease my pan. And if I do that, then the outcome is going to be much different. How to sew a button, same concept as a fixed directive. First you have to do this, then you have to do this, then you have to do this. Now you might be thinking, okay, well, some people bake cakes differently than others. That is true. So in that instance, the steps might be different, but the order is going to be the same. To replicate how you bake a cake, the order of those steps has to be done the way that you see them written down. Now, how my mom bakes a cake, whatever steps she would write down, I'd have to follow it in a fixed way. Do that first, do this second, do this third. So in that instance, while you might be thinking, yeah, but isn't that loose? Well, I still have to go from step 1 down to step 10, or however many steps there are. If you wrote how to make friends and my mom wrote how to make friends, I could follow them in a logical order in how they're written, but I could probably also switch it up a little bit, insert my own style or flair, and that's more of an example of a loose type of directive process analysis. Both of these process analyses can be short, can be long, depends on the subject matter, depends on the level of detail that's being incorporated. I think a lot about when I'm like scrolling through Facebook or Instagram or Pinterest and there's a great recipe for chocolate chip cookies. And before the recipe, there's this explanation from like a mom blogger about how her kids love chocolate chip cookies. And I'm just scrolling past all these things with pictures, and she's writing out the steps, right? She is explaining. Now, first we get in the kitchen and we're laughing and we're having a good time, and I grab this bowl, and my son gets the spoon from the drawer, and she's really like narrating this process. That's a longer directive process analysis. But then we see, usually at the bottom of a page like this, we're going to see just that short, quick, if you needed a glimpse, short directive process analysis. The longer is going to have more detail. It might have more explanation, some rationalization for why certain ingredients are used or why you should go in that order. There might even be extra bits of information, like helpful hints or tips, that the shorter version isn't going to have, but both of those are still examples of a directive process analysis. And all of the directive process analyses are meant to be replicated. The goal of writing is so that the reader can do it themselves. In most of the instruction sets that you'll find, so these directive process analysis, you will see that each step begins with a verb. Collect the ingredients, mix the ingredients, bake the ingredients, eat the cake, right? And there's an implied you there. There's the suggestion through language that you, the reader, is the one doing these steps, but it doesn't have to say, you should start by collecting your ingredients, then you should mix the ingredients, because in a directive, if the goal is replication, the goal is also to get your reader to digest that information as quickly as possible in a clear and communicated way, but leaving out all of those extra words can be, I guess, one of the most helpful ways to do that. So I think most of you can think of examples of directive process analysis. So a set of instructions you have laying around your house, a set of instructions that you see in a college course, a set of instructions that you have had to Google online because maybe you don't know how to do something. And it can come in a number of formats. You can see written instructions, you can see instructions with pictures only, like graphic designed instructions. You can see video instructions. If the goal is to walk you through a process so that you can do it yourself, it's telling you how to do something, that's a directive. Now, if I switch sides here and I look at the explanatory process analysis, there are certainly some similarities. You're getting information, just like you were in the directive, but the goal is to be informative. So the goal in the explanatory process analysis is to just tell you how something is done, but not how to do something. And there's a really fine line between those two things. The directive process analysis will tell you how something is done, how a button is sewn on a shirt, but in the way that you can do it yourself. The explanatory process analysis isn't encouraging you to do it yourself, and that's often due to the subject matter. You're more likely to find an explanatory process analysis in a textbook, especially like science, maybe history class. You'll find a lot of explanatory process analysis. And it's explaining a process, and I like to categorize these as two types, either a past process or a general process. So, for example, a general process, and if you're looking at the list of examples here, would be something like, how do we elect Congress members? Well, what is the process we take? It's just like general, how do we do it? It's not, again, asking you to go out and repeat that process. You might be a part of that process, but you can't control the whole thing. How do ice crystals form is an example of a general process. How a bill becomes law is an example of a general process. And then we have like what I like to call past process. So what led to the Revolutionary War? First this happened, then this happened, here were some other factors, adding pressure, and eventually we got here. You're going to see a lot of these past process explanatory process analyses in history textbooks. These are all usually longer, essay style, so while a directive can be long, an explanatory is not usually short. It certainly could be. It could be a quick overview, you know, how ice crystals form. This happens, this happens, this happens. But likely an explanatory is going to be longer than a directive. Not always, but likely. And it's meant to be understood, right? It's meant to provide information so that the reader can understand that there is no goal in an explanatory process analysis to say, hey, I want you to repeat this process. Now, does that mean that the subject matter can control it, right? In a past process, the subject matter is going to control it. So, in an explanatory process analysis, that's what led to the Revolutionary War. We're really not trying to get people to redo the Revolutionary War, or to, you know, have a whole nother segment of history that leads to the Revolutionary War. So, I think, as just a tangent side note, that gets me to this concept I never understood when I was a student, which is, why do I need to study history? Because I never liked history. Don't tell anyone. Don't tell your history teachers. But so, you know, why do I even need to read about the process of what led to the Revolutionary War? It's past. It's already happened. Who cares? Well, we can analyze these processes so that we don't repeat them, right? If it's a process we don't want to happen, then we should know what leads to that final result, so that if we see ourselves heading in that direction, we can say, oh my gosh, look at this. We need to stop. I wish I knew that when I was younger. But then I think I went on a tangent and I don't know where I am now, you guys. That's okay. But I'm getting to the end. So then we have subject matter. Yes. All right. Does an explanatory process analysis require a certain type of subject matter? Meaning, can the subject of an explanatory process analysis also be the subject of a directive? Yes. If you're looking at a past process, it's not likely. But, for example, an explanatory process analysis on ice crystals would be something like, how do ice crystals form? I want to know that information. How does this happen? Now, if I were writing a directive process analysis on ice crystals, I might say, here's how you make ice crystals, or here's how you make ice. How to make ice. The steps are going to look different. The writing style is going to look different. And it's the difference between the intent to replicate, like you see in a directive, versus the intent to understand, to give information, like you see in an explanatory process analysis. So this is it. This is the last slide. These are the types of process analysis that you'll encounter. Our unit focuses on what type of process analysis? The directive, right? Because we're talking about instructions, we're going to analyze instructions, and we're going to write instructions. I think that while you will absolutely probably most likely be asked to write explanatory process analyses in history and in maybe like a science class, biology or something like that, I think that in life, in the future, it's more likely that you will have to tell people how to do something, write some steps out for others at your job or in school, your friends, do this, do that, do this, maybe even communicate clear instructions to your future children or your current children or other people's children. So I think figuring out how to clearly communicate instructions is probably best for the purposes of just helping you with writing in general. If you have any questions about this lecture video, please send me an email. Otherwise, go ahead and check out the weekly activities and discussions and the instruction analysis assignment and email me if you have questions about those.